They say the pandemic brought out the worst in people, but I think it revealed something else, too. Could a single act of kindness turn a city around? A long line in the cold, a quiet man with a cane, 2 hours on his feet, and then someone cut in front, claiming a right he hadn't earned. The man didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, he just stepped back, but someone was watching, and when the truth about who he really was came out, that line stopped. So did the city, because sometimes it takes one silent act to remind us what dignity looks like and how gratitude isn't optional, it's a responsibility. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. April 2020, Bakersfield, California. The country was in lockdown, the virus had emptied streets, shut down schools, and turned ordinary grocery runs into something quiet and uncertain. That morning, a chill set in the air like fog, lingering low along Maple Street, where the community food bank operated 3 days a week. A line had already formed well before dawn. It stretched around the corner, snaking between faded parking lot stripes and worn-out city benches, everyone standing apart, 6 feet at least. No one spoke much, not out loud. The silence was part fear, part fatigue, and part something harder to name, like grief still forming. Masks covered every face, blue surgical ones, cloth ones sewn at home, scarves pulled tight around noses and mouths. All that remained visible were the eyes, and they said plenty. At the very end of the line, leaning on a pair of silver crutches, stood Walter Harris. He had arrived just after 6 a.m. long before most of the others, but others had arrived earlier. It didn't matter, he was used to waiting. Walter was 79 years old, though his back was still straight and his voice still steady. His face, partially hidden behind a faded black mask, held the quiet resolve of someone who had learned long ago to endure. His coat was a wool military green, decades old but clean, with a button missing on the inside flap. Underneath his left pant leg was looser because beneath it his leg bore the deep toll of a different war 52 years ago in the jungles near Kisan. Walter had carried 3 of his brothers out of an ambush, only 2 lived. A piece of shrapnel found his knee in the process. He never talked about it. The medal sat in a drawer somewhere next to a folded flag and a letter signed by a president long gone. No one in that line knew any of that, and Walter didn't offer it. He wasn't there for recognition, he was there because his neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, hadn't left her home in weeks. She lived alone, lost her husband last fall. Her pantry was empty, her children were states away, and Walter still believed it was his job to show up when someone needed help. So he stood there waiting, one foot anchored, one knee trembling slightly from the cold. Could this quiet man's sacrifice inspire a nation? The food bank had announced essential supply packs: dry beans, rice, canned vegetables, powdered milk, and bread. Limited stock, first come, first served. He'd stood in lines before, in monsoons, in chow halls, at VA clinics that forgot his paperwork, but this line felt heavier, not because of the time he could handle that, but because of the silence, because of how invisible everyone felt behind their masks and their distance. The line moved slowly, one cautious shuffle at a time. Volunteers at the front were doing their best. A young girl in her early 20s, possibly a college student, stood by the entrance with a clipboard, checking people off one by one. By 8:20 a.m., Walter had moved halfway up the line. By 9, he was within 20 people of the front. The morning sun rose higher, but brought little warmth. His hands gripped the tops of the crutches tightly, adjusting every few minutes to shift pressure. His left leg, wrapped under a soft brace, had begun to burn, but he didn't flinch, didn't even sigh. A mother 2 rows back was trying to calm a toddler who kept tugging at her coat. An elderly couple in front of him leaned into one another wordlessly. The rhythm of the line was consistent until it wasn't. At 9:10, a young man appeared. He walked quickly toward the entrance, not from the line, but from the sidewalk, coming from a black sedan parked across the street. He wore bright white sneakers, designer joggers, and a hoodie with bold letters on the front. Around his neck, dangling from a lanyard, was a badge, the kind you print out at home. He approached the volunteer at the front with the kind of confidence that makes people move out of the way before they realize why. "Hey, I've got priority access," he said, gesturing at the laminated pass. "I'm registered disabled." The young volunteer blinked behind her face shield. Okay, do you have a specific appointment?" "No, it's a general authorization," he said, lowering his mask to speak more clearly, then quickly pulling it back up. "Just, not safe for me to wait out here." Asthma. The clipboard wavered in her hands. She looked toward the line, then back at the man. Several people had turned to watch. Walter didn't say anything, he just looked. The man walked right past them all, Stepping into the entrance without a backward glance, the line fell back into silence. The volunteer seemed nervous. She hadn't argued, she just nodded and let him through. Walter shifted his crutches slightly and stepped back one space, maybe two. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't even noticeable unless you had been watching closely, but Linda Thompson noticed. She stood 10 feet off to the side in a navy puffer coat and old running shoes, clipboard tucked under her arm. She wasn't on official shift yet, just early watching. She had seen Walter when he first arrived, noticed the crutches, the coat, the quiet composure. She didn't know his name, but there was something familiar in his posture, in the way he didn't move like someone who wanted pity. He moved like someone who had already carried more than his share. When the young man bypassed the line, Linda's stomach tightened, but when Walter stepped back without a word, her eyes followed him like a shadow. No protest, no complaint, no gesture of indignation, just that quiet step. She felt something crack, not loudly, just enough to remind her that this moment meant something. She pulled her phone from her pocket and opened her notes app. The wind picked up again, tugging at the edge of Walter's coat. His hands didn't loosen, his eyes stayed ahead. It was hard to tell if he was thinking of the cold or something much further away, but Linda watched him, heart heavy, throat tight, and thought if anyone deserved to be seen today, it was him. Linda Thompson had always believed that real strength didn't need a microphone. It's why she chose teaching, why she volunteered here on her Saturdays, handing out bags of food quietly and respectfully, never making a show of it. It's also why she couldn't look away from the man in the olive coat that morning. She didn't know his name, not yet, but she had been watching him for almost 2 hours. When he first arrived, she had noticed the way he walked, not quite a walk, more of a glide between each step. Assisted by aluminum crutches, the left leg never fully touched the ground. She could tell it wasn't just age, it was old pain, the kind that changes the way you move for the rest of your life. He didn't ask questions, didn't fidget, he just waited like time had nothing on him. Linda had seen hundreds of people come through that food line since the start of the pandemic, some scared, some angry, many desperate. But this man, he radiated something different, something calm, grounded. And when that young man strolled up and cut the line with that flimsy badge and no limp to match his claim, Linda's stomach clenched. But what made her heart ache wasn't the badge or even the volunteer who hesitated and then let it slide. It was what the man on the crutches did next. He stepped back just slightly, just enough to make room. Not a word, not a sigh, no protest, no ego, and Linda couldn't stop watching him. She stayed where she was, near the side, arms crossed against the cold. Her phone was in her jacket pocket. She hesitated, then slowly pulled it out. She didn't take a video, that didn't feel right, but she took a photo, just one. The man standing alone, back slightly bent, hands gripping the crutches, shoulders quiet beneath his green coat. Around him, the line was still. The world kept moving, but for that one moment, it felt like everything had slowed just enough for someone to notice. And Linda noticed. That night after finishing her shift and showering the chill from her bones, Linda sat at her small kitchen table still thinking about the man. Her laptop glowed softly in the dim light of her apartment. She didn't know what exactly compelled her to write. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was admiration, but mostly it was a feeling that if she didn't say something, no one would. So she began. Today I saw something I can't forget. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Then she continued. I saw a man wait in line for food for over 2 hours. He didn't complain, he didn't speak, he just stood, balancing on crutches, one leg shaking in the cold. When a young man cut the line with a badge, no one questioned. This man didn't argue, he just stepped back silently. I don't know his name, but the way he carried himself, the way he endured without demanding anything, reminded me what real strength looks like. If anyone knows him, I'd love to thank him. She attached the photo, no filter, no cropping, just truth. Then she hit post. She closed the laptop, assuming it might get a few likes from friends. Maybe one comment, maybe nothing at all. She didn't expect what came next. By morning, her phone was buzzing. A few shares turned into dozens, dozens into hundreds. People from Bakersfield began tagging neighbors. Veterans groups reposted the story. Comments started rolling in from strangers. That sounds like my uncle. My dad would have done the same. Who is he? One comment stood out. A man named Daniel Nguyen wrote, I think I know who that is. My father served in Vietnam, said a Marine dragged him out of a crater at Khe Sanh during a firefight. The man's name was Walter Harris. My dad said he never got to thank him. If this is him, thank you. From both of us. Linda read that comment 3 times. She put her hand over her heart without thinking. The story had found a name. Walter Harris. Could this discovery rewrite his legacy? She opened a new tab, searched, and found it. Sergeant Walter D. Harris, U.S. Marine Corps Silver Star recipient, Kisan, 1968. A citation, a record, a life in print that few had seen. Linda sat there staring at the screen. The man she had seen quiet, waiting, forgotten, had once saved lives under fire, and now, over 50 years later, he had stepped aside for someone who hadn't earned it without so much as a word. The irony cut deep, but it also made the story stronger. By the end of that week, the story had gone local. The Bakersfield Daily ran a column titled "The Man Who Stepped Back." A radio station interviewed Linda on air. Veteran organizations in Los Angeles and San Diego shared the post, and someone from the local news called the food bank asking if Sergeant Harris still came by. Linda didn't know how to feel. Part of her was relieved that the world was noticing him, but another part worried that Walter wouldn't want it, that maybe he'd prefer to stay invisible until she got a message from someone using the name WH68. Miss Thompson, I appreciate the kind words. I didn't expect to be seen, but I suppose sometimes stories find their way out. No matter how quiet you were respectful. Thank you for that. If people are remembering Kisan again because of a can of beans and a quiet step back, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Walter Harris. Linda smiled, her eyes watered a little. She replied, "Thank you for showing us what real service looks like. I think the world needed to see it again over the next few days." Linda walked by the food line again. Walter wasn't there, but someone had placed a small American flag at the edge of the sidewalk where he had stood, and taped to it was a copy of the photo she had taken. No words, just the image. The wind moved it slightly in the breeze, but it stayed upright like him, always standing, even when no one saw. 3 days had passed since Linda Thompson's post had made its quiet, powerful rounds across town. In a city already struggling to stay grounded during the worst health crisis in generations, the story of the silent Marine had offered something different. It wasn't rage, it wasn't noise, it was dignity, soft-spoken and unshakable. And for Michael and Gwen, it meant everything. Michael didn't usually scroll social media. He didn't have time for it. As director of the Bakersfield Community Food Outreach Center, he spent most of his hours coordinating supply runs, approving shifts, writing letters to city council, and trying to figure out how to stretch every donated pallet just a little farther. But that Wednesday evening, his assistant forwarded him a link. "Sir, I think you might want to see this." It was Linda's post with a photo and that name, Walter Harris. Michael stared at it longer than he expected to, then he whispered almost involuntarily, "It's him." He knew that name not from town, not from recent memory, but from his childhood, from the story his father used to tell once every few years, always in the quiet moments when war wasn't politics but pain. A young Marine named Harris had pulled his father out of a kill zone near Kisan in 1968, left his own knee behind in the process. His father, David Nguyen, had never seen Walter again, never got to thank him, but he had spoken his name with reverence. Michael and Gwen hadn't forgotten it. That Friday morning, the food bank parking lot was buzzing with activity. A new shipment had just come in overnight. Volunteers were moving crates, organizing supplies, setting up lines, but Michael wasn't in his office. He was out front and he was looking. Linda was there again too, sorting clipboards near the gate. When she spotted Michael approaching, she instinctively straightened up. "Good morning, Mr. Nguyen," she said. Michael nodded. "Linda, thank you for what you wrote." "For noticing." She blinked. "You read it?" "I did more than read it," he said, voice low and steady. "I know who that man is." Before Linda could ask more, Michael turned toward the line. Walter was there just past the corner, same coat, same crutches, standing as he had the last time with that quiet, steady posture, eyes forward. Michael swallowed hard. He walked back toward the door, looked at his radio, and said 3 words, "Pause operations now." A few staff glanced up confused, but his tone left no room for questions. Michael walked across the lot slowly, deliberately. All around them, the sound of activity faded. Boxes were set down, conversation stopped, people began to notice, some turned, a few removed their masks slightly to see better. Linda followed at a distance, heart pounding. Michael approached Walter with reverence in his step. When he reached him, he stopped about 6 feet away, then took a slow breath and raised his voice so others could hear. "Mr. Walter Harris," he said, clear and steady, "my name is Michael. I am the director of this center, and I want to tell you something I've waited over 40 years to say." Walter looked up, expression calm, but curious. "My father is David Nguyen. He served in Vietnam and Kisan. He told me a young Marine carried him through enemy fire when he was unconscious. That Marine was you." The line behind them had frozen. Even the wind seemed to still. Michael's voice softened, but it didn't waver. "You saved my father's life, Mr. Harris, and I believe you saved part of mine, too. Because of you, I had a dad, a coach, A man who lived long enough to walk me down the aisle, to hold my kids, to teach me how to lead. Michael stepped forward now, slowly, no longer 6 feet away, and so today, on behalf of this city, on behalf of the staff, and on behalf of my family, I want to make something very clear. He turned to the crowd, eyes sweeping over stunned faces. A man who has sacrificed that much for others should never have to stand in the cold for a bag of food. No one spoke. Michael looked back at Walter, voice strong as steel. You'll never wait in this line again, not on my watch. Then gently, he gestured to two staff near the front. Please escort Mr. Harris inside. Let's make sure he's taken care of. Linda's hand was over her mouth. One of the volunteers, a young man who had previously stayed silent during the earlier incident, stepped forward quickly. Sir, it would be an honor, he said to Walter, his voice cracking slightly. Walter didn't move for a moment, then quietly he nodded, his voice barely more than a whisper. Thank you. But I'm just here to help someone else. Michael smiled. Then let us help you just this once. Walter didn't resist. He passed the line slowly, flanked by respect, not by ceremony. He walked through a sea of lowered eyes and quiet nods. No one needed to cheer. They just stood in silent recognition. Some placed hands on hearts, others wiped their eyes. One woman, an older nurse, murmured to her daughter beside her, "That's what a real hero looks like." Inside the center, Walter was offered a chair, then coffee, then silence, the kind of silence that holds space, not awkwardness. A few minutes later, a city representative arrived with a small framed certificate of civic recognition. A group of local veterans who had been notified after Linda's story reached the local American Legion, quietly entered and offered salutes, not out of protocol, but respect. Linda stood nearby the whole time, holding her phone at her side, but not recording. She didn't need a video. She had already told a story that mattered. Michael came back out to the line once Walter had been seated. He looked around. Operations will resume, he said, but I want everyone to remember something. Dignity isn't just about what someone wears or how they speak, it's about what they've endured and what they still choose to carry. People nodded and the line began to move again, but it didn't feel the same. It felt quieter, more aware. Back inside, Walter looked around the modest room, the shelves stacked with donations, the posters about hygiene and safety, the volunteers moving quietly. He took a sip of warm coffee and said quietly, "I'm not used to all this attention." Michael, standing nearby, replied with a smile, "Then it's been overdue." Walter chuckled softly, then paused. "Your father, he made it home." Michael nodded. "He did. He passed 5 years ago. But he never forgot you." Walter looked out the window toward the crowd. "Neither will I." It started with a post, a single image, a quiet man in the eyes of a stranger who chose not to look away. Linda Thompson's story, first shared on a neighborhood Facebook group, had now been featured on the evening news, not just Bakersfield's local channel, but across California, then across the nation. The story had a simple title when CNN finally aired it, "The Marine Who Stepped Back." By then, it had already made its way to newspapers in New York, Seattle, even Honolulu. One article called it the story America needed right now. Another wrote, "In a time when shouting seems louder than service, a man named Walter Harris reminded us what quiet heroism looks like." And then came the letters. Walter never had a computer, his old flip phone couldn't open images, and he didn't have an email, but his mailbox on the porch, bent slightly from years of weather, was suddenly full every morning. Cards from school kids, letters from veterans, notes from strangers saying only one thing, "Thank you." A widow from Pennsylvania wrote, "My husband never talked about Vietnam, but when I read about you, I saw something in his eyes for the first time in years." He cried. A teenager from Oregon wrote, "I never understood what a silver star meant until now. I want to join the Marines because of you." One envelope stood out, cream-colored, handwritten, stamped from Arlington, Virginia. Inside on thick stationery was a short message. "Sergeant Harris, I was the last one you pulled from that crater. You didn't know it then, but I lived. I went on to serve 34 years. I retired as a general in the United States Army. I owe that life to you." The letter was signed, General Frank M. Talbot Rhett, 3rd Infantry Division, former Deputy Commander, CENTCOM. Walter read the letter twice, then once more slower. He placed it on the kitchen table next to his morning coffee, folded his hands quietly, and let the silence hold the moment. He hadn't expected this, he hadn't asked for it, but somewhere deep inside, deeper than memory, deeper than metals, he felt something settle. Not pride, but peace. A week later, a reporter asked to visit his home. Walter politely declined. He said the story was already told. He didn't need cameras in his living room or headlines with his name in bold. What he needed, he said, was to show up at Mrs. Rodriguez's house on Saturdays like he always had, bringing her groceries and asking about her cat. What he needed was routine. But the town didn't forget. At the next city council meeting, Mayor Gonzalez held up a printed copy of the photo Linda had taken and declared, "We can't change the past, but we can change what we honor in the present." A motion passed unanimously to rename the food bank building to the Walter D. Harris Community Service Center. Walter was invited to the ribbon cutting. He arrived 10 minutes early. Quiet as always, Linda stood beside him. "Nervous? Do you mind if I say something?" Walter looked at her. Soft, "It's your voice that started all this, you should finish it." Linda stepped forward. Facing the modest crowd gathered beneath folding chairs and taped-off spacing markers, she took a breath, then spoke. "There are people in this world who do good loudly, and that's fine, but every once in a while, we meet someone who did something extraordinary, then walked away without waiting for applause. Walter Harris is one of those people. We don't name this building because of medals, we name it because of moments where someone stepped back so others could move forward, and we name it because Bakersfield never forgets the people who carry this country on their shoulders even when no one was watching." There was no cheering, just the kind of hush that carried more weight than noise ever could. Walter kept living like he always had. His morning started early, coffee at 6 o'clock, feed the birds by 6:30, VA appointment every third Thursday, church on Sundays, and food drop-offs to neighbors who didn't have cars or didn't speak English or were simply too tired to wait in long lines. He didn't do interviews, he didn't ask to speak at schools, but the kids started coming anyway. One afternoon, 2 eighth graders from Linda's school came by with a class project. They had drawn a timeline of his life in colored pencils. On the bottom corner, one had written, "Real heroes don't wear capes, they wear coats, and wait in line without complaining." Walter smiled at that. He didn't correct the spelling, he just taped it to his fridge. Linda kept volunteering. She and Walter didn't talk often, but when they did, it always felt like a quiet understanding. She still wrote online, sometimes short posts, small reflections. On the 1-year anniversary of that morning in April, she wrote, "One man stepped back, one crowd saw, one story changed the way we line up for respect." It went viral again. This time, no one was surprised. Walter's health declined slowly. As years do, he moved a little slower, the limp deepened, the crutches turned into a cane, but he never lost that look in his eyes, the one that said, "I'll stand if someone else needs to sit." He didn't talk about Vietnam, but he always stood when the anthem played, and he always saluted the flag outside City Hall, even when no one else did. And on his 80th birthday, a black SUV pulled up outside his modest home. A young officer in full dress uniform stepped out, handed Walter a sealed envelope, and saluted him cleanly. Inside was a letter from the Secretary of Defense. It read, "Sergeant Harris, we recently updated our Veteran Recognition Archive. Your name now appears under Legacy Protectors, Unsung Heroes of Vietnam. Your service, your silence, and your example are part of what holds this nation together." Walter placed the letter on the shelf beside a dusty frame. He didn't say anything, but his hand rested there for a long time. And maybe that's what gratitude really is, not the applause, not the headlines, but the ripple, the echo, the quiet man at the end of the line who no longer had to stand alone because someone finally had said his name out loud. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.